The monument had
The
been
ancient
silent
power
for 400
awakens.
years,
High scans.
until the moment Sarah
The
Chen's
ancient power
palm
awakens.
slammed against
High
the surface.
scans.
Our
But that
destinies
moment
align.
was still
And let
6
it be.
hours away. The treaty world of Meridian was a jewel made of glass, light, and carefully orchestrated lies. It hung in the comfortable gravity well of a binary star system, a sprawling metropolis constructed entirely around a single inexplicable anomaly. The city itself was a masterpiece of galactic concurrent architecture, featuring spiraling towers that seemed to defy the very laws of physics and boulevards paved with crushed gemstones that chimed softly underfoot like distant bells. Every species in the known galaxy maintained an embassy here, and every embassy competed ruthlessly to outshine its neighbors in displays of wealth and cultural superiority. Banners rippled in the artificial breeze. Holographic advertisements cycled through languages that human ears couldn't process. The air smelled of ozone and exotic spices and the particular metallic tang that came from having too many different atmospheric preferences compressed into one breathing zone. But at the center of the glittering city, effectively swallowing the light of the twin suns, stood the monument. It rose from the middle of a perfect spherical crater, a monolith of absolute black stone that towered over even the highest government spire. 2 miles of lightless material that seemed to exist in defiance of observation itself. It had no seams, no texture, no reflection. Light didn't bounce off its surface. Light died there, swallowed into a darkness so complete it hurt to look at directly. Surrounding its massive base, hovering in the air like fish suspended in an invisible aquarium, were glyphs of hard light, ancient symbols that drifted in slow, hypnotic patterns. Scholars from 1,000 worlds had spent 4 centuries trying to translate them. They had failed for 400 years. The monument was the heart of the conquered, the sacred relic that supposedly legitimized the union of 1,000 worlds under one governing body. Politicians made speeches in its shadow. Treaties were signed on its steps. Wars were prevented or started by invoking its silent authority. Yet for all its importance, for all its weight in galactic politics, the monument had never made a sound. It had never moved. It had never responded to touch or prayer or the desperate pleas of dying civilizations. It simply existed. A void in the landscape, a question without an answer. Sarah Chen stood at the customs processing bay of the orbital docking ring, clutching a battered leather satchel that had seen better decades, trying very hard not to look like she wanted to dismantle the gravity plating beneath her boots just to understand how it worked. She was Earth's diplomatic support specialist. It was a deliberately vague title for a woman who was half engineer, half historian, and fully regretting every choice that had led her to this moment. She was 32 years old with dark hair pulled back in a practical braid that refused to stay neat, and eyes the color of strong coffee that missed nothing. She wore the gray dress uniform of the United Earth Coalition, which looked stiff and uncomfortable compared to the flowing silks and organic armors of the alien crowds pressing around her on all sides. She was not the ambassador. The ambassador, a red-faced man named Garrett, was currently screaming at a customs drone about atmospheric humidity levels. His voice carried across the entire bay, echoing off the curved metallic walls. Sarah closed her eyes and counted to 10 in 3 different languages. She had been selected for this mission because her psychological profile listed her as exceptionally calm under pressure and diplomatically harmless. In reality, she just processed panic internally, usually by calculating structural load limits and mentally redesigning whatever room she was standing in. The universal translator hooked over her ear beeped softly. It was a bulky, outdated piece of Earth technology that hissed with static every time someone spoke too quickly. The Concord had offered to provide modern translation implants. Earth's Security Council had politely declined, paranoid about foreign technology interfacing directly with human neural tissue. So Sarah was stuck with a device that made her look like she was wearing a particularly aggressive hearing aid. A shadow fell across her. The crowd parted, not out of respect exactly. It was more like a sudden instinctive need to be elsewhere, the way small animals scatter when a hawk's shadow crosses the ground. Sarah looked up and up. The man standing before her was nearly 7 feet tall, slender as a willow branch, and radiating an aura of controlled intensity that made the air around him feel colder. His skin was the color of moonlight on snow, with faint patterns of bioluminescent light pulsing beneath the surface in rhythm with a heartbeat she couldn't hear. His eyes were solid black, no visible pupil or iris, just depthless voids that seemed to absorb everything they looked at. He wore robes of dark gray that shifted color slightly, depending on the angle of the light, and his hair was silver white, cropped short in a style that suggested military practicality rather than fashion. Sarah's translator squealed with feedback, then settled into a low hum. She knew who this was. The briefing dossier had included exactly 3 photographs and a warning label that might as well have read, "Dangerous, do not engage unless absolutely necessary. Cassian Velar, former High Envoy of the Veyan Protectorate. Retired 5 years ago under circumstances the file had described as classified and complicated. Now worked as an independent consultant, which was diplomatic code for, he knows where all the bodies are buried because he helped dig the graves." Cassian looked down at the human woman with an expression that gave away absolutely nothing. "Sarah Chen," he said. His voice was deep and precise, each word measured like he was rationing breath. "Specialist in pre-conquered archaeology and structural engineering. Graduated top of your class from MIT. Published 3 papers on ancient transit networks that were either brilliant or profoundly naive, depending on which academic you ask." Sarah's translator crackled. She tapped it reflexively. "You've done your homework. Should I be flattered or concerned?" "Neither. I was hired to assess potential security risks at the signing ceremony." "You are on the list." "I'm a risk? I fix things. I read old books. I'm about as dangerous as a library card." "Precisely." Cassian tilted his head slightly, a gesture that looked almost avian. "The most dangerous people are often the ones everyone underestimates. Libraries have started more revolutions than armies." Sarah wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a threat. Her translator chose that moment to emit a high-pitched screech that made several nearby aliens flinch. She slapped the side of it, and it settled back into its normal staticky hum. "Sorry, Earth technology. We're still working out the bugs." Something flickered in Cassian's black eyes. It might have been amusement. "I am aware. Your species only achieved faster than light travel 53 years ago. You are, in Concord terms, infants playing with fusion drives." He paused. "Yet here you are, at the most important diplomatic event in a generation. One might wonder why. One might wonder why a retired envoy is working security detail. Seems a bit below your pay grade." The corner of Cassian's mouth twitched. Definitely amusement this time. "Director Kane requested me personally. She values experience." His gaze sharpened. "She also values control. The ceremony this afternoon is not merely a formality, Ms. Chen. It is theater. Every moment has been choreographed, every word scripted. Every participant placed precisely where they will cause the most effective impact. And I'm part of the show. You are the punchline." The words hung in the air between them. Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. She had suspected, of course. Earth's position in the Concord was precarious at best. They needed the trade routes, the protection, the technology, but the price was steep, and it was paid in humiliation. "They're going to make an example of us," she said quietly. "They are going to make an example of you specifically." Cassian's voice was matter-of-fact, not cruel, just stating an observable reality. "You will be called to the stage. You will be contrasted against our achievements. You will represent everything humanity lacks. And then you will sign away mining rights to your asteroid belt in exchange for continued Concord protection." "Protection from what?" "From us." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, really looked at him. Past the intimidating height and the alien features and the reputation that preceded him. She saw something in those black eyes that the briefing file hadn't mentioned. Exhaustion. "You don't agree with this," she said. It wasn't a question. Cassian's expression didn't change, but the bioluminescent patterns beneath his skin pulsed slightly faster. "What I agree with is irrelevant. I am here to ensure the ceremony proceeds without incident. I am telling you this as a courtesy because I have read your work and it demonstrates a frustrating tendency toward honesty. Do not be honest this afternoon, Miss Tinkern. Do not speak out of turn. Do not question. Do not resist. Play your role, sign the document, and return to your ship intact. And if I don't, Then I will be filing a report on how Earth's diplomatic specialists suffered an unfortunate accident. Meridian's gravity fluctuations can be unpredictable. People fall, necks break. These things happen. He said it without malice, without inflection, like he was reading a weather report. Sarah's hands tightened on her satchel. That's the courtesy? A threat wrapped in a warning? The courtesy is that I am telling you the truth. Most people in this city will smile while they destroy you. I am offering you the respect of honesty. What you do with it is your choice. He turned to leave, his gray robe swirling. Mr. Valar, Sarah called after him. He paused but didn't turn around. Thank you for the truth. He was silent for 3 heartbeats. You are welcome, Ms. Chen. I hope you survive long enough to regret it. Then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd with a grace that something 7 feet tall should not possess. Sarah stood alone in the chaos of the docking bay, her translator hissing softly, her mind racing. She had 6 hours until the ceremony. 6 hours to decide if she was going to play along with the script or if she was going to do something monumentally stupid. Knowing herself, she was probably going to do something monumentally stupid. The private viewing sanctum overlooking the Monument Plaza was designed to impress. Floor-to-ceiling windows made of smart glass that could shift from transparent to opaque with a thought. Furniture that hovered slightly above the floor, suspended on personal gravity fields. The air was precisely climate-controlled and scented with something that smelled like vanilla and ozone. Director Helena Kane sat on a throne made of white coral, watching the security feeds that displayed every angle of the city below. She was a member of one of the founding species, humanoid in shape but clearly not human. Her skin was the color of polished bronze, smooth and metallic looking. Her hair floated around her head in a personal gravity field, golden strands drifting like she was perpetually underwater. She was beautiful in the way ancient statues are beautiful. Perfect, cold, untouchable. Her eyes were vertical slits of burning orange, and they missed nothing. Cassian entered without knocking. He had that privilege. For now. The human specialist has been processed through customs, he reported. She is currently being escorted to the diplomatic quarters. No incidents. Yet, Kane said, her voice sounded like stones grinding together, beautiful and harsh. You spoke with her. It wasn't a question. Of course she knew. Kane had eyes everywhere. I assessed her as instructed. And? Cassian considered his words carefully. He had survived 40 years in galactic politics by knowing exactly when to lie and when lying would get him killed. She is intelligent, observant. She will recognize the ceremony for what it is. Good. Kane's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. I want her to understand. I want her to feel the weight of Earth's insignificance. That is the point of theater, Cassian. The audience must believe what they are seeing is real. She stood, moving to the window. Below, workers were putting the final touches on the ceremonial stage at the monument's base. Banners hung from poles. Holographic displays cycled through their programming. Everything was perfect. Kane placed one bronze hand against the glass, her reflection overlaying the monument's dark silhouette. 400 years. 400 years of silence. 400 years of wondering what it means, what it wants, why it exists. And in all that time, it has given us nothing. No wisdom, no guidance, just presence. Perhaps that is enough, Cassian offered. The mystery itself has value. It unifies the conquered. It gives us something beyond politics to believe in. Kane turned to look at him, and her orange eyes blazed with something that might have been anger or might have been fear. The mystery is a lie we tell ourselves so we can sleep at night. But I do not sleep well, Cassian. I have not slept well in 40 years. Cassian said nothing. He had learned long ago that Kane's moments of vulnerability were often the most dangerous. She reached into her robes and pulled out a small holographic projector. She activated it with a touch, and an image materialized in the air between them. It showed a young woman, bronze skin, golden hair still obeying normal gravity. She looked perhaps 30 years old, her orange eyes wide and earnest. Do you know when this was taken? Kane asked. No, Director. 40 years ago, I was a junior analyst in the Archives Division. I've found something, a discrepancy in the historical records, a cover-up regarding the monument's original discovery. I thought I was being diligent. I thought I was serving the truth. She waved her hand and the image shifted. Now it showed the same young woman standing before a council's tribunal. Her hands were bound. Her face was bruised. I was accused of sedition, of threatening Concord's stability with dangerous speculation. My research was classified. My career was destroyed. I was given a choice: disappear quietly or face a very public trial that would end with my execution. The hologram vanished. Kane looked at Cassian, and for just a moment, he saw past the director, past the politician, to the woman who had learned a terrible lesson 40 years ago. I chose to disappear, and I learned the most important truth of my life. It is not what you know that gives you power. It is what you control. Control the narrative or be erased by it. Director, the monument will speak today, Cassian. For the first time in 4 centuries, it will break its silence. And when it does, it will say exactly what I tell it to say. Cassian went very still. That is not possible. The monument has never responded to any attempt at conventional manipulation. Yes. Kane smiled, and it was not a kind smile. But I have had 40 years to study unconventional methods. 40 years to place the right people in the right positions. 40 years to build what I need. She pulled back her sleeve, revealing her wrist. Cassian stared. There, burned into her bronze skin, was a mark. A circle of blackened tissue, scorched and scarred, with thin lines of circuitry embedded beneath the damaged flesh. The circuitry pulsed with a faint, sickly light. This is my key. Grown from a fragment of the monument itself, cultured in my own tissue, encoded with command protocols. Today, when the ceremony reaches its climax, I will touch the monument, and it will respond. It will validate my authority. It will bless the new resource treaty. It will prove that the conquered, that I, speak with divine mandate. And if it does not respond, Cassian asked carefully, it will respond. I have made certain of that. But if somehow it resists, if somehow my calculations are wrong, then I have contingencies. The human specialist, for instance. If the monument remains silent, she will suffer a very public breakdown. A biological contaminant will be discovered in her blood. Earth will be quarantined. The treaty will still be signed, but under much harsher terms. Cassian felt something cold and heavy settle in his chest. You would frame an innocent woman to maintain your narrative. I would do what is necessary to maintain order. Kane's voice was flat, factual. Chaos is the only true enemy, Cassian. Everything else is negotiable. Surely you of all people understand that. He did understand. He had spent 40 years making similar calculations, weighing innocent lives against political stability, choosing the lesser evil so often that he had stopped being able to tell the difference. But something about Sarah Chen's coffee-colored eyes and her terrible, outdated translator and her frustrating tendency toward honesty made him tired of the math. I will ensure the ceremony proceeds as planned, he said. See that you do. Kane turned back to the window, dismissing him. And Cassian, keep the human close, very close. I want her visible. I want the contrast. The primitive standing next to our achievement. It will make excellent footage. Cassian bowed slightly and left the sanctum. He walked through the corridors of the embassy wing, his mind racing. He had been a part of this system for so long. He had justified so much in the name of stability. But standing in that room, listening to Kane describe her plans with the casual certainty of someone who had long ago stopped questioning their own righteousness, he had felt something crack inside him. He pulled out his personal comm device, an old model that he knew for certain had not been compromised by Kane's surveillance network. He typed a message, encrypted it 3 times, and sent it to an address that officially did not exist. The message was simple. The ceremony is a trap. The human is the target. I'm going to do something monumentally stupid. Then he deleted the sent message, destroyed the encryption keys, and went to find Sarah Chen. He found her on a public observation deck, standing at the railing, looking down at the Monument Plaza 500 stories below. She had changed out of her dress uniform into something more practical. Dark pants, a simple shirt, boots designed for actual walking rather than standing at attention. Her satchel was slung over one shoulder, and she had a small notebook in her hands, sketching something with quick, precise strokes. Cassian approached quietly, but she must have sensed his presence. She didn't startle, just glanced up with those 2 observant eyes. Mr. Valar, come to threaten me again, or is this a social call? Neither. I came to apologize. That got her attention. She closed the notebook, tucking it into her satchel. For what? For assuming you needed to be warned like a child. You are clearly intelligent enough to recognize a trap without my assistance. He moved to stand beside her at the railing, careful to maintain a respectful distance. And for suggesting that survival was more important than integrity, that was my cynicism speaking, not my judgment. Sarah studied him for a long moment. What changed your mind? A conversation with Director Kane. She reminded me of something I had forgotten. What? Why I retired. They stood in silence, watching the activity below. Workers were testing the holographic displays. Security drones patrolled in precise patterns. Everything was choreographed, just as Cassian had said. The monument, Sarah said quietly. Do you believe it's really divine? That it has some kind of higher purpose? I believe it is very old and very powerful, and that we do not understand it. Whether that makes it divine is a question above my limited expertise. But you've stood next to it. For 40 years you've worked in its shadow. You must have some opinion. Cassian was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she had heard it before. I believe it is waiting. For what, I do not know. But silence is not the same as absence. Sometimes the most important things are the ones that wait until we are ready to hear them. Sarah looked at him, and he saw something shift in her expression. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. Director Kane is going to make the monument speak today, Sarah said. It wasn't a question. She believes she can force it to validate her authority. And you don't think that's possible? I think that if the monument could be controlled, someone would have managed it in the last 400 years. I think attempting to force it is either brilliantly arrogant or catastrophically foolish. Or both. Or both. Sarah turned back to the plaza below. Her hands gripped the railing, knuckles white. They're going to use me as a prop, a symbol of everything Earth lacks. Then they're going to make us sign away our resources in front of the entire galaxy. Yes. And if I refuse, then you will likely jam, and Earth's situation will become significantly worse. So my choices are humiliation or death. Those appear to be the primary options, yes. Sarah laughed. It was a short, bitter sound. You know what the worst part is? They're not even wrong. Earth is primitive. We are barely holding on. We do need the Concorde's protection. Everything they're going to say about us this afternoon is technically true. Truth and cruelty are not mutually exclusive. She looked at him, surprised. That's almost kind. I am occasionally capable of kindness. It is not my default setting, but I have been known to make exceptions for people who remind me why I used to care about things. Is that what I am? A reminder? You are someone who has not yet learned to accept that honesty is a luxury and survival is a necessity. I find that refreshing and concerning, and something I would prefer not to see destroyed if it can be avoided. Sarah was quiet for a long time. If I play along, if I let them humiliate me, sign their treaty, go back to Earth with my tail between my legs, will it actually help? Will it keep Earth safe? For a time, until Kane decides she needs to manufacture another crisis to maintain her grip on power. And if I do something stupid, if I refuse or speak out or somehow manage to throw a wrench in her perfect ceremony, then you will almost certainly die. Earth will suffer consequences, and Kane will simply adjust her narrative to account for your resistance. The machine will continue grinding forward. One broken cog will not stop it. So there's no winning. There is surviving. That is not the same as winning, but it is not nothing. Sarah looked down at her hands. They were calloused from years of field work, scarred from a dozen minor accidents with tools and ancient artifacts. Working hands, builder's hands. My grandfather told me something once. He was an engineer, worked on the first generation of faster-than-light drives. He said the universe has rules, physical laws that you cannot negotiate with or charm or threaten. Gravity doesn't care about your feelings. Momentum doesn't compromise. And if you want to build something that lasts, you have to respect those rules. She looked up at Cassian. Director Kane thinks she can control the monument, force it to obey her will. But what if it's not a political tool? What if it's more like gravity? something that operates according to rules we don't understand but that exist whether we acknowledge them or not. Then attempting to manipulate it would be profoundly stupid, Sarah finished. Like trying to negotiate with physics. Cassian felt a smile tug at the corner of his mouth. An actual, genuine smile, which surprised him more than it probably should have. You are going to do something monumentally stupid this afternoon, aren't you? Probably. And you understand that I am obligated to try to stop you. You could try them. Sarah's eyes sparkled with something that might have been humor, or might have been carefully controlled terror. But I'm betting you're curious to see what happens when someone finally refuses to play along with the theater. Curiosity is a luxury I can rarely afford. But you're here talking to me, warning me, apologizing. That's not the behavior of someone who's completely committed to maintaining the status quo. She was right, of course. Dangerously perceptive. Cassian made a decision. It was possibly the worst decision he had made in his entire career, which was saying something. If you are determined to do something catastrophically foolish, I cannot stop you. But I can ensure that when you inevitably fall, you do not break your neck on the way down. Is that an offer of help? It is an offer to stand nearby and look impressive while you dig your own grave. What you interpret that as is your own business. Sarah extended her hand. Deal. Cassian looked at her hand. In his culture, touching was reserved for family or extremely close bonds. But Sarah Chen was human, and humans touched freely, and something about the gesture felt important. He took her hand. Her grip was strong, her palm warm. The contact was brief, professional, and somehow more meaningful than most of the elaborate ceremonies he had participated in over 4 decades. We should go, he said. The ceremony begins in 1 hour. You will need time to prepare. Prepare to be humiliated in front of a billion species. Prepare to survive whatever comes next. They walked together through the corridors of the diplomatic quarter, an unlikely pair drawing stares from passing aliens. The 7-foot Vayan and the human woman with her outdated translator and her terrible boots and her hands that knew how to build things. Neither of them spoke. Both of them were thinking about the monument, about silence, about what happens when you touch something that has been waiting for 400 years to be understood. The plaza of the Ascendant was a cauldron of noise and heat. 3 suns' worth of light beat down on white stone that had been polished to a mirror shine, magnified by shimmering force fields that kept the atmosphere breathable for oxygen-dependent species while simultaneously accommodating methane breathers and ammonia processors. The crowd was immense. Thousands upon thousands of beings from across the known galaxy, pressed together in a sea of chitin and fur and scales and skin in every color the universe had managed to invent. They chattered in languages that Sarah's struggling translator could barely process, creating a wash of noise that was almost physical. And in the center of it all, swallowing the light, stood the monument. Up close, it was terrifying. Sarah had seen images, of course, holographic recordings, academic papers filled with speculation. But nothing had prepared her for the reality of standing in its shadow. It was so black that her eyes couldn't focus on the surface. It was like looking into a deep ocean trench or the space between stars. Her brain kept insisting that there should be depth, dimension, something to grasp onto, but there was nothing. Just absolute absence. The glyphs floated around it like drifting fish in an aquarium, alien symbols that pulsed with soft light. They were beautiful and incomprehensible and maddening. The ceremony was in full swing. Ambassador Garrett stood on a raised platform at the monument's base, sweating profusely despite the climate control. He was flanked by a council of multi-limbed beings who spoke so rapidly that Sarah's translator had given up and was now just emitting a constant low buzz. A counselor, some species Sarah didn't recognize with too many joints and skin like bark, was delivering a speech that was clearly designed to belittle. We are here to civilize you, to save you from your own primitive instincts. Earth demands resources, yet offers nothing but instability and chaos. The crowd laughed. It was an ugly, rattling sound that rippled through thousands of throats in dozens of different registers. Ambassador Garrett's face turned a deep red. Sarah stood off to the side, corralled behind a velvet rope with the other support staff, watching her superior being systematically destroyed. Cassian stood beside her. He was in full ceremonial armor now, burnished bronze plates that caught the light and made him look even more imposing than usual. His expression was neutral, but Sarah noticed his hands were clenched at his sides. "We offer cooperation," Garrett was saying, his voice hoarse. "We offer innovation. We offer—" "You offer debris," the counselor interrupted, and the crowd roared with laughter again. On a high balcony overlooking the plaza, Director Kane watched with a small, satisfied smile playing on her bronze lips. She raised one hand slightly. Two guards in heavy armor stepped forward. They grabbed Sarah by the arms. "What?" she started. "Move," one of them grunted, his voice distorted through his helmet. They shoved her past the velvet rope, past the ceremonial boundary, and onto the stage. Suddenly, she was standing in the harsh spotlight. The eyes of a billion beings focused on her through camera drones and holographic feeds and direct observation. She felt impossibly small, like an insect pinned to a board. "Look at them," the counselor sneered, pointing one too long finger at Sarah. "Even their technicians look like refugees, weak, unprepared, unsophisticated. Is this the species we are asked to embrace into our enlightened community?" The laughter grew louder. It was a physical weight pressing down on her. Sarah looked desperately toward Cassian. He had stepped forward to the edge of the platform, his black eyes locked on hers. She saw something there that might have been encouragement or might have been a warning. She couldn't tell which. The counselor stepped closer to her, raising his ceremonial staff. It was topped with a glowing gem that pulsed in time with his words. "Kneel. Kneel before the monument and beg for the Concorde's mercy. Show your betters the respect they are owed." The plaza went silent. All those eyes, all those cameras, all that judgment. Sarah looked at Ambassador Garrett. He had given up. His shoulders slumped in defeat. He wasn't going to help her. She looked at the guards. They had their hands on their weapons, ready to enforce compliance. She looked at the monument. It stood there, silent and black and absolutely indifferent to the theater playing out in its shadow. And Sarah Chen, who had spent her entire life being told she was not enough, who had worked twice as hard as everyone else just to be given half the credit, who had swallowed her pride and her anger and her brilliant ideas because that was what survival looked like, said, "No." It wasn't a shout. It wasn't dramatic. It was just a word, a fact, a line drawn in white stone. The counselor's eyes widened. The crowd's laughter cut off. "What did you say?" "No," Sarah repeated louder this time. "I won't kneel." The counselor swung his staff, a threatening gesture meant to cow her into submission. He didn't actually intend to strike her. The optics would be terrible. But the movement was aggressive, designed to make her flinch. Sarah did flinch. It was a reflex. Years of learned behavior, of making herself small, of avoiding conflict. She stepped backward to avoid the staff. Her heel caught on the uneven stone at the edge of the platform. She stumbled. Behind her was the monument. She threw her hand out to catch her balance, to keep from falling, and Sarah Chen's palm slammed against the black stone. For one frozen moment, nothing happened. The crowd held its breath. The counselor froze mid-swing. Cassian took an involuntary step forward, his hand reaching out as if he could somehow pull her back from whatever was about to happen. Then the silence broke. It didn't break gradually. It shattered, like glass hit with a hammer, like ice cracking under pressure, like the sound barrier breaking at the moment a ship goes faster than light. An absolute perfect silence swallowed the plaza. The jeering crowd went mute. The wind stopped. The hum of the holographic displays cut out. Even the ambient noise of thousands of beings breathing seemed to pause. Sarah stood with her hand pressed against the monument, her eyes wide, her mouth open in shock. The stone under her palm was not cold. It was not warm. It was alive. She could feel it. A pulse. A rhythm. Not a heartbeat exactly, but something similar. Something ancient and vast and profoundly aware. Then the monument woke up. It didn't glow. It didn't shine. It ignited. Deep beneath the surface, glyphs flared into existence, burning with a light that was not white or gold, but a violet so dark it hurt to look at. They rushed towards Sarah's hand like iron filings to a magnet, like rivers flowing downhill, like everything in the universe suddenly had a direction, and that direction was her. A shockwave of pressure ripped outward. It wasn't wind, it wasn't force. It was something else. A psychic hammer blow that slammed into every mind in the plaza simultaneously. Every universal translator sparked and died in the same instant. thousands of devices fusing into useless plastic and melted circuitry. The feedback screech was cut short as the technology simply ceased to function. Sarah tried to pull her hand away. She couldn't. She was stuck. The stone held her, warm now, pulsing like flesh under her palm. She gasped, her vision swimming with geometric shapes that shouldn't exist, mathematical impossibilities that her brain couldn't process. And then the voice came. It didn't come through her ears. It didn't come through the air. It blossomed directly in the center of her brain, a voice that sounded like shifting tectonic plates and falling stars and the slow rotation of galaxies. It was clean, ancient, undeniable, and everyone in the plaza heard it. It bypassed language, bypassed biology, bypassed the dead translators. It spoke directly to the mind, to the part of consciousness that existed before words. The monument stayed silent for 400 years, until the inheritor touched it. The words hung in the psychic air, heavy and absolute. Sarah screamed, but no sound came out. Energy surged up her arm, burning and freezing simultaneously. She watched in horror as a thin ring of dark light formed around her wrist, searing into her skin like a brand. It wasn't a burn, it wasn't pain exactly, it was a bond. It looked like a bracelet made of night, pulsing with the same violet light as the glyphs. The connection severed as quickly as it had begun. The monument released her. Sarah staggered back, clutching her wrist. Her eyes were wide, her pupils blown, reflecting moving symbols that were still dancing across her vision. The silence broke. Chaos erupted like a bomb detonating. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated panic. Counselors were screaming in languages no one could understand anymore because the translators were dead. Security drones hovered confusedly, their logic circuits fried by the psychic pulse. The crowd surged in every direction at once, a stampede of terror. On the balcony, Director Kane was gripping the railing so hard the metal bent under her bronze fingers. She wasn't screaming, she was staring at Sarah Chen with a gaze that was ravenous. It wasn't fear, it was hunger. "Contain her!" Kane's voice cut through the case, raw and unenhanced without the amplification systems. "Seize the human, she has contaminated the sacred relic." The guards snapped out of their shock. They lowered their spears, advancing on Sarah with mechanical precision. Sarah couldn't move. Her legs felt like water. Her mind was still echoing with that voice until the inheritor touched it, and she couldn't make sense of any of it. She saw the spear tip coming toward her chest. Then a shadow swept over her. Cassian moved faster than human eyes could track. He didn't draw a weapon. He stepped between Sarah and the guards, his ceremonial armor flaring with reflected light. He grabbed Sarah, not by the hand, but by the front of her shirt, and yanked her into his shadow, into the protective space of his presence. "Back," Cassian commanded. His voice was ice and iron and absolute authority. The guards hesitated. He was a former high envoy. Touching him was an act of war against the Vayan Protectorate. "She is under arrest," one of the guards snarled in broken common tongue. Cassian looked him in the eye and lied with the perfect, terrifying calm of someone who had ended governments over dinner. "She is under envoy protection. By the ancient laws of diplomatic sanctuary, she is my charge. Touch her and you declare war on my house." It was a bluff, a massive, treasonous bluff. There was no law that protected a human who had just done whatever Sarah had just done to a sacred monument. But the hesitation was all he needed. "Run," Cassian hissed in Sarah's ear. He spun her around, shoving her toward a service access door behind the platform, the same door the maintenance crews had used. Sarah's feet found traction. She ran. Cassian was right beside her, his long strides eating up the distance. They burst through the door just as a plasma bolt scorched the stone where Sarah had been standing a heartbeat before. The service corridors were dark and cool and smelled of ozone and industrial grease. Emergency lighting cast everything in shades of red. "Left!" Cassian shouted, grabbing Sarah's shoulder and steering her down a narrow ramp. Sarah was gasping for air, her heart hammering so hard it felt like it might crack her ribs. "What just happened?" "My wrist? It's burning, I can't—" "Keep moving or I will leave you here to be vivisected for science," Cassian snapped. They sprinted past startled maintenance workers who pressed themselves against the walls. Alarms began to blare, a rhythmic, deafening hooting that made Sarah's teeth ache. The mark on her wrist pulsed in time with the alarms. She could feel it. Not just the physical sensation of the brand, but something else, a connection. a thread of awareness that stretched back toward the monument, towards something vast and patient and impossibly old. It was like a radio station playing in the back of her skull. Images were flashing through her mind, overlaid on the dark corridor. She saw star routes that weren't on any conquered map. She saw civilizations burning. She saw a door made of black glass that only opened when a hand with 5 fingers and a specific genetic resonance touched it. I can see them, Sarah gasped, stumbling. I can see maps, star routes, ancient. Hallucinations are a common side effect of almost dying, Cassian said grimly, dragging her around a corner. Focus on your feet. They came to a junction. 3 corridors stretched out in different directions. Which way? Sarah demanded. I don't. Security will be sealing the sector in 30 seconds, a voice crackled from Cassian's comm device. You need to pick a direction. Now. Sarah closed her eyes. The mark on her wrist throbbed. She felt a pull, like a magnet in her chest, tugging her toward the center tunnel. That one, she said, pointing. It feels open. Cassian didn't argue. He grabbed her arm and hauled her down the center passage. They ran until their lungs burned. The sounds of pursuit, heavy boots, shouting voices, the whine of charging weapons echoed behind them, getting louder. They burst into a large maintenance bay filled with drone parts and hydraulic lifts. Cassian slapped a control panel. Heavy blast shutters slammed down, sealing the door. Almost immediately, a red light began to flash above the sealed entrance. Override initiated, a mechanical voice droned. Access granted in 10 seconds. Sarah leaned against a crate, sliding down until she was sitting on the cold floor. She cradled her wrist. The black ring was pulsing with a soft, dark light. It matched the rhythm of her heart. Then it sped up. It was beating faster than her heart. It was beating for something else. Cassian stood over her, his chest heaving, his perfect composure finally cracking. This was a mistake, he said quietly. I should have let them take you. Sarah looked up at him. Her eyes were terrified, but the brown irises were flecked with strange violet sparks that caught the emergency lighting. Why didn't you? Cassian looked at the mark on her wrist. He looked at the way the shadows in the room seemed to bend slightly toward her, like she had become a source of gravity. Because I have a terrible feeling that you are the only interesting thing that has happened in this city in 400 years. The blast door groaned, metal buckled, sparks showered down. Sarah scrambled to her feet. The mark flared bright, casting long, distorted shadows against the walls. The voice in her head grew louder. Not words this time, just a sensation. Expectation. Waiting. The door began to rise. Cassian leveled his weapon at the opening. Sarah looked around desperately for anything that could help them, but all she had was the mark and the sinking, terrifying realization that the monument hadn't just touched her. It had chosen her, and it wasn't going to let her go. The blast door groaned upward, revealing the silhouettes of armed guards filtering into the maintenance bay like smoke pouring through a crack. Cassian didn't wait for them to fully breach. He fired 3 precise shots, controlled bursts of blue energy that struck the door's hydraulic mechanism. The system sparked and seized, jamming the door at waist height. It bought them maybe 30 seconds. Sarah's mark pulsed violently, sending waves of heat up her forearm. The shadows in the bay weren't just bending toward her anymore. They were moving, stretching like living things reaching for connection. There, Cassian said sharply, pointing to a service hatch in the floor. Water reclamation tunnel. Leads to the Undercity. They ran. Sarah yanked the hatch open, revealing a vertical shaft with maintenance rungs descending into darkness. She didn't hesitate, swinging herself onto the ladder and climbing down as fast as her shaking hands would allow. Cassian followed, sealing the hatch behind them, just as weapons fire chewed through the air where they'd been standing. The tunnel was narrow, cramped, and smelled like recycled water and chemical treatments. Emergency lighting strips provided just enough illumination to see the rungs beneath their hands. Sarah's arms burned, her wrist was on fire. But she kept climbing down, down, down into the bowels of the city. Behind them, muffled through layers of metal, they could hear the sounds of pursuit. Voices shouting coordinates, boots on grating, the whine of drones being deployed. They will flood the sector with scan drones, Cassian said quietly as they descended. Your mark is broadcasting an energy signature. We might as well be carrying a flare. Can you turn it off? Can you turn off your heartbeat? Point taken. They reached the bottom of the shaft and emerged into a wider space, a junction chamber where multiple water pipes converged. The air was thick with moisture and the constant background hum of pumps. Sarah's translator, miraculously, had survived the monument's pulse. It crackled to life, picking up a transmission from nearby. Containment teams in position, biological hazard protocols, shoot to disable, capture alive. Cassian pulled a small device from his belt and crushed it against the wall. It emitted a high-pitched whine, then exploded in a burst of electromagnetic interference. Sarah's translator died again, along with every electronic system within a 50-meter radius. That will blind their sensors for approximately 3 minutes, Cassian said. We need to be far away when it clears. A voice called out from the shadows ahead. Over here, quickly. Sarah tensed, but Cassian's hand on her shoulder kept her from bolting. A small figure emerged into the dim light, no more than 4 feet tall, covered in russet-colored fur, with enormous ears and bright, intelligent eyes that reflected the emergency lights like a cat's. He wore a battered leather flight jacket covered in grease stains and carried what looked like a salvaged datapad held together with tape and optimism. Pip, Cassian said, and there was something almost like relief in his voice. Cassian, you beautiful disaster, Pip chittered, his voice rapid and musical. When I heard about the monument going supernova, I knew you'd be in the middle of it somehow. And this must be the human everyone's trying to kill. Sarah Chen, Sarah managed. Are you going to help us or turn us in? Pip's ears twitched with what might have been amusement. Help, obviously. Kane put a bounty on you, 50,000 credits, which means you're worth at least 10 times that to the right buyer. And I know all the right buyers. He saw Sarah's expression and laughed, a chittering sound. Relax, I'm not selling you. I'm investing in you. Anyone who makes Kane that angry is someone I want on my side when the whole house of cards comes down. He gestured for them to follow, leading them through a maze of pipes and access tunnels that seemed to exist in 3 dimensions simultaneously. Sarah lost all sense of direction within minutes. Where are we going? She asked. The Undercity. Kane's drones don't like the magnetic interference down there. Plus it smells like fried algae, which confuses their bioscanners. You'll fit right in. They emerged onto a suspended walkway that opened into something Sarah's brain couldn't immediately process. The Undercity of Meridian was built in the negative space beneath the gleaming towers above. A sprawling, chaotic web of platforms and bridges hanging from the city's superstructure, like a chandelier made of scrap metal in desperation. Neon signs in a dozen languages advertised services Sarah couldn't translate. The air was thick with cooking smoke and ozone and the sharp tang of too many different atmospheric preferences compressed into one breathing zone. Gravity was inconsistent here. Every few meters, Sarah felt her stomach lurch as the plating shifted, making her alternately heavy and weightless. Keep your head down, Cassian murmured, pulling up his hood. And for the sake of all that's holy, cover that mark. Sarah wrapped her hand in a strip of cloth Pip tossed her, but she could still feel it pulsing beneath the fabric, a second heartbeat that didn't quite sync with her own. They moved through the crowd. Pip led them with the confidence of someone who knew every shortcut and shadow, ducking into alcoves when patrol drones buzzed overhead, taking routes that required climbing and occasionally leaping across gaps that made Sarah's heart stop. There's a ship, Pip was saying, speaking rapidly as they walked. Old courier vessel, mostly legal. I've been keeping it fueled for emergencies. She's called the Nomad's Regret. Terrible name, I know, but she's fast and her stealth systems still work. Where would we go? Sarah asked. Her wrist was getting worse. The mark was no longer just warm. It was hot, and the heat was spreading up her arm in thin lines that looked disturbingly like the circuitry she'd seen in Director Kane's scarred wrist. There are coordinates, Sarah said suddenly. The monument showed me coordinates. Not here. Not on Meridian. Something in the asteroid belt. A moving target. Pip stopped walking. He turned to look at her, his large eyes reflecting the neon lights. The monument showed you something? When I touched it, it wasn't just the voice. It was like it downloaded a map into my head. Star routes that don't exist on any official chart. And there's something out there, something old. An archive maybe? I can't explain it. I just know we need to go there. Sarah, Cassian said carefully, you just experienced a massive psychic shock. Your perceptions may not be I know what I saw, Sarah interrupted. She met his black eyes directly. You said the monument was waiting for something. What if it was waiting for someone to ask the right question? What if it's not a monument at all? What if it's a signpost? Pip made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been terror. You're talking about the archive, the theoretical central repository that's supposedly myth and legend and academic fantasy. Is it? Sarah pulled back the cloth, revealing the mark. It was glowing brighter now, the violet light pulsing in a pattern that looked almost like code. Does this look theoretical to you? Pip stared at the mark, his ears flattened against his skull. Kane's going to burn the city down to get you back. If you really have access to the archive, if you can prove what she's been hiding for 40 years, she won't just kill you. She'll erase you from history. Then we need to move fast, Cassian said. He looked at Pip. Can you get us to your ship? Can I? Of course I can. Who do you think you're talking to? Pip's bravado was back, but Sarah could see his hands shaking slightly. But once we're off-world, you're on your own. I'm a broker, not a revolutionary. They started moving again, faster now. The ship turned out to be hidden in a scrapyard on the outer edge of the Undercity, camouflaged among the debris and derelict vessels that accumulated in any major spaceport. It was small, sleek, and looked like it had been assembled from parts of at least 3 different manufacturers. She's not pretty, Pip admitted as they approached, but she's got good bones. And more importantly, she's got a jump drive that doesn't require filing a flight plan with Concord traffic control. They were 20 meters from the ship when Sarah's mark suddenly flared white-hot. She screamed, doubling over as pain shot through her entire arm. It felt like her veins were filling with molten metal. Cassian caught her before she hit the ground. What's happening? He demanded. Something's wrong, Sarah gasped. The mark, it's not just responding to the monument anymore. It's responding to something else, something close. A voice echoed across the scrapyard, amplified and cold. Sarah Chen, you are ordered to surrender immediately. You have been exposed to a dangerous pathogen and require immediate medical containment. Director Kane's face materialized on every functional screen in the scrapyard, a holographic projection that loomed 3 stories tall. This is your final warning. Surrender now and Earth will face minimal sanctions. Continue to resist and your homeworld will be quarantined indefinitely. She's bluffing, Pip said, but he didn't sound certain. Sarah tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. The mark was spreading. Thin lines of violet light were creeping up her arm, branching like lightning, frozen in flesh. Cassian looked at her, then at the ship, calculating distances and probabilities. Can you run? He asked. I can barely stand. That wasn't the question. Sarah gritted her teeth. She pushed herself upright, using Cassian's arm for support. I can run. Then we run. They broke for the ship. Immediately, the scrapyard erupted in weapons fire, not from Kane's guards, from something else. Gray-robed figures materialized from behind debris piles, moving with an eerie synchronization. They wore masks that were completely featureless, smooth surfaces without even eye holes. The silenced, Cassian breathed. How did they find us? One of the figures pointed directly at Sarah. When it spoke, its voice was a synthetic monotone that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The inheritor must not reach the archive. The cycle must remain broken. Silence is safety. They opened fire with weapons that made no sound. The rounds were visible only as distortions in the air, like heat shimmer. Where they struck, matter simply ceased to exist. A support beam disappeared, sending a pile of scrap crashing down. A section of the ground evaporated, leaving a perfectly smooth crater. Entropy weapons, Pip yelped. They're using entropy weapons in a populated zone. They're insane. Cassian returned fire, his shots forcing the silence to take cover. Get to the ship. I'll cover you. Sarah ran. Every step sent lightning through her arm. The mark was burning so hot now that she could smell her own flesh cooking beneath the cloth wrapping. Pip reached the ship first, slapping the access panel. The boarding ramp lowered with a hydraulic hiss. Sarah was 10 meters away. 5 meters. A silenced figure dropped from above, landing directly in her path. It raised its weapon, the distortion field already forming at the barrel. Sarah reacted on pure instinct. She thrust her marked hand forward, palm out, and thought one word with all the desperate force she could muster. Stop! The mark flared. A pulse of violet energy exploded outward from her hand. The entropy weapon simply disassembled. It didn't break or shatter. It came apart into its component molecules, which drifted away like smoke. The silenced figure staggered backward, its featureless mask cracking down the center. Sarah stared at her hand in horror and wonder. "Move!" Cassian roared. She moved. They scrambled up the ramp just as more entropy rounds chewed through the space they'd been standing in. Pip slammed the controls. The ramp retracted, and the ship's engines screamed to life. "Strap in!" Pip shouted from the cockpit. "This is going to be ugly!" The Nomad's regret tore upward through the atmosphere with all the grace of a brick thrown by a particularly angry giant. Warning alarms blared. The structural integrity field flickered. Through the viewports, Sarah could see Concorde interceptors breaking formation to pursue. "Can we outrun them?" Sarah gasped, strapping herself into a seat that was definitely not designed for human proportions. "Outrun? No. Outmaneuver? Maybe. Survive? We'll find out." The ship banked hard, pressing Sarah into her seat with crushing force. Her vision grayed at the edges. Cassian had taken the co-pilot's seat, his long fingers dancing across controls with practiced precision. 3 interceptors. No, 4, and 2 of those gray sphere ships from the silenced. Gray spheres? Pip's voice cracked. The ones with the subspace scissors? The ones that can sever a ship's connection to local physics and just turn it off? Those would be the ones, yes. "We're going to die. We're absolutely going to die. I should have sold you when I had the chance." Sarah closed her eyes, trying to block out the chaos. Her arm was agony. The market stopped spreading, but the lines of light were pulsing in rhythm with something she couldn't identify. Not her heartbeat, not the ship's engines. Something else. She reached for it. Not physically. She kept her hands locked on the armrests, but mentally, following the thread of awareness that connected her to the monument, to whatever vast intelligence had chosen to brand her. And suddenly, she could see. Not with her eyes, with something else. Some sense that humans weren't supposed to have. She saw the space around them, not as empty void, but as a web of gravitational currents and energy flows. The interceptors were bright spots of coherent matter. The gray spheres were darker, somehow wrong, like holes in the fabric of reality. And between them, invisible to normal sensors, were paths. Threads of least resistance, where the fundamental forces aligned in ways that made travel easier, faster, safer. "Turn 30 degrees starboard," Sarah said. Pip didn't look away from his controls. "We're in the middle of evasive maneuvers. I can't just turn now." Something in her voice made him obey. The ship banked sharply. An instant later, one of the gray spheres fired its entropy weapon through the space where they would have been. The beam missed by centimeters. "How did you—" Cassian started. "I can see them," Sarah said. Her eyes were still closed, but tears were leaking from beneath her eyelids. "I can see the paths. The monument is showing me. Dive, drop altitude by 2,000 meters, then hard burn to port." Pip followed her instructions without question now. The Nomad's regret twisted through space in patterns that should have been suicidal. But every time it seemed they were about to slam into a debris field or fly directly into an interceptor's weapons range, the path Sarah called out led them through a gap that hadn't existed a second before. One of the interceptors couldn't match their maneuvers. It clipped an asteroid and tumbled away, spilling atmosphere. "We're approaching the belt," Pip called out. "It's too dense to navigate at this speed." "Full thrust," Sarah commanded. "Trust me. You're asking me to fly blind into an asteroid field while being chased by ships that can literally turn off physics. Do you understand how insane that sounds?" "Yes, do it anyway." Cassian looked at her, really looked at her. Her eyes were open now, but the brown irises were almost completely obscured by violet light. She wasn't just seeing the paths anymore. She was becoming them. "Do it," Cassian said quietly. Pip made a sound that was half prayer, half curse, and pushed the engines to maximum. They plunged into the asteroid belt. What followed was less a chase and more a dance choreographed by forces beyond human comprehension. Sarah called out vectors that made no sense according to normal navigation. The ship wove between rocks the size of cities, through gaps measured in meters, riding gravitational eddies that pulled them faster than the engines alone could manage. The interceptors tried to follow. 2 of them collided with each other in a catastrophic impact that lit up the belt with a brief, brilliant flare. One of the gray spheres came apart for no reason Sarah could identify. It simply stopped maintaining cohesion and drifted away in pieces. The last interceptor gave up, breaking off pursuit and limping back toward Meridian. They were alone in the belt, surrounded by tumbling rocks and ice and the infinite, patient darkness of space. Pip let out a sound that was somewhere between a tool and hysterical laughter. "We're alive. We're actually alive. I can't believe we're alive." Sarah slumped in her seat, the violet light fading from her eyes. She looked down at her arm. The mark had changed. It was no longer just a ring around her wrist. It had extended up her forearm in intricate patterns that looked almost like circuitry, almost like ancient writing, almost like a map. "Where now?" Cassian asked, his voice carefully neutral. Sarah pointed through the viewport at a particular quadrant of the belt where the asteroids seemed to cluster more densely. "There, something's moving in there, something big." "I'm reading nothing," Pip said, checking his sensors. "Just rocks and ice and more rocks. It's cloaked, or it's phased out of normal space. I can't tell which, but it's there and it's waiting." "Waiting for what?" Sarah looked at the mark on her arm, then at Cassian. "For someone to knock." They flew deeper into the belt, following Sarah's directions more than the sensors. The asteroid she guided them toward was unremarkable at first glance. Roughly spherical, maybe 3 kilometers across, tumbling in a slow rotation that seemed random. But as they got closer, Sarah could see what the sensors couldn't. The rotation wasn't random. It was precise, calculated. The asteroid was moving in a pattern that kept one specific face always oriented away from Meridian, always shadowed, always hidden. "There," she said, pointing, "the north pole of its rotation. There's a gate." Pip brought them in closer, using thrusters to match the asteroid's spin. Now they could see it, a circle of metal embedded in the rock, covered in the same angular script Sarah had seen in her vision. "That's old network architecture," Cassian said softly. "I've seen fragments in museums, but never anything intact, never anything functional. If this is real, it's real," Sarah said. She was already unbuckling from her seat. "I need to get closer." "Sarah, we don't know what's in there. This could be a trap. This could be—" "It's not a trap. It's a test." She pulled on an EVA suit from the ship's emergency locker. It was designed for Pip's species and fit her like a child wearing adult clothes, but it would hold pressure. Cassian followed her to the airlock without being asked. He didn't try to talk her out of it. He just checked her suit seals and put on his own gear with practiced efficiency. "If this kills us," he said as they cycled the airlock, "I want it noted that I advised against it." "Noted." They jumped, the magnetic clamps on their boots engaged as they landed on the asteroid's surface. The rotation created a gentle sense of down, enough to orient by. Sarah walked toward the gate, her marked arm tingling with recognition. The circle was maybe 10 meters across, engraved with symbols that hurt to look at for too long. There were no visible controls, no obvious mechanism. She knelt at the edge and pressed her marked hand against the metal. The symbols flared to life, cycling through a sequence that Sarah somehow understood despite never having seen it before. Light, action, witness. She pressed each symbol in turn. The gate spiraled open like a camera aperture, revealing a shaft of absolute darkness that led down into the asteroid's core. "Sarah," Cassian said carefully, "we should call Pip. We should bring equipment. We should trust the monument," Sarah finished. She looked at him, and her eyes were clear and certain, and maybe a little bit terrified. "It brought me here for a reason. I need to know why." She stepped into the darkness. Cassian followed because of course he did. They fell for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Then gravity reasserted itself gently, setting them down on a walkway that floated in an impossible space. They were inside a hollow sphere. The walls were lined with millions of alcoves, each one glowing with soft amber light. Holographic images drifted through the air, fragments of civilizations, extinct species, languages that had died millennia ago. And in the center, floating above a pool of liquid that looked like starlight caught in tar, was a figure. It wore robes that shifted color like oil on water. It had no face, just a smooth reflective surface where features should have been. "Welcome, inheritor," the figure said, its voice made of 1,000 whispers layered together. "Welcome, witness. I am the curator. I am the keeper of what was deleted, the preserver of what the Concord burned. Sarah stepped forward. You know who I am? I know what you are. You bear the mark. You heard the call. You followed the path. The curator glided closer. But the question is, do you know what you seek? Truth, Sarah said. Director Kane is hiding something. The monument, the network, the history of my species. I need proof. I need to stop her before she starts a war to cover her crime. Proof I can provide, but proof has a price. Of course it did. What price? The curator's mirrored face turned toward her, and Sarah saw her own reflection staring back. Exhausted, marked, desperate. Truth requires truth. To take what you need, you must give what you hide. You must confess the shadow you carry. Sarah's jaw tightened. What kind of confession? The kind that hurts, the kind you have never spoken aloud. Cassian stepped forward. If this is some kind of psychological manipulation, it is acknowledgement, the curator interrupted. The monument does not traffic in lies, Cassian Valar. You should know this. You have spent 40 years surrounded by them. The curator gestured, and a sphere of data materialized in the air between them, complex, glowing, containing everything Sarah had asked for. Financial records, communication logs, blueprints for Director Kane's counterfeit mark. Here is your proof. Here is the evidence that will end her, but you cannot take it until you pay. Sarah looked at Cassian. He nodded slightly. She took a breath. I'm tired of being invisible. My whole life, I've been the person in the background, the technician, the specialist, the one who does the work while other people take the credit. And I told myself it was fine, that I didn't need recognition, that the work itself was enough, but that was a lie. The words were coming faster now, harder. I want to matter. I want people to see me and know that I'm brilliant, that I'm capable, that I deserve to be here. And when the monument chose me, when it marked me, there was this terrible, wonderful moment where I thought, finally, I'm not invisible anymore. Finally, I'm the important one. Tears were streaming down her face now. And I hate that I felt that way. I hate that some part of me was happy about the chaos and the danger because it meant I wasn't just furniture anymore. What does that make me? What kind of person is grateful for disaster because it makes them visible? The curator was silent for a long moment. Then it spoke, and its voice was gentle. It makes you human. It makes you honest. The shadow is acknowledged. The data sphere drifted towards Sarah. Wait, Cassian said. He stepped forward, his movement stiff. If she must pay, then I must as well. You were not asked. I am asking myself. Cassian looked at the curator's blank face. I have spent 40 years in service to the Concord. 40 years making compromises, choosing lesser evils, telling myself that stability was worth any price. And 5 years ago, I retired because I finally realized the truth. I was a coward. His voice cracked slightly. I had a protege once, brilliant young woman from a rim world. She discovered corruption in the mining contracts, wanted to expose it. I told her to be patient, to work within the system, to not make waves. And while she waited, while she trusted my experience, they had her killed, made it look like an accident. He was shaking now. I could have protected her. I had the influence, the connections, the power, but I was afraid of losing my position, my reputation, my comfortable life, so I let her die. And then I retired and told myself it was about principle, about disgust with the system. But really, I left because I couldn't face what I had become. He looked at Sarah. And when I saw you standing there, refusing to kneel, choosing honesty over survival, I saw her. And I was afraid I would fail you the same way. That my fear would get you killed too. The curator nodded slowly. The shadow is acknowledged. The datasphere split, fragments of light drifting toward both Sarah and Cassian before reforming. Take your proof, but know this, truth carries consequences. The knowledge you now possess will destroy the world as it exists. Many will die in the chaos that follows. Can you bear that weight? Sarah reached for the sphere, her marked hand trembling. I don't know, but I know that the current world is built on lies and exploitation and the blood of people nobody remembers. If it has to burn to make something better, then let it burn. She touched the sphere. It dissolved into light that flowed into her mark, into her arm, into her mind. Information cascaded through her consciousness. 40 years of evidence, undeniable and complete. Behind her, she heard Cassian gasp. She turned. The entrance to the archive was sealing, but it wasn't sealing naturally. Something was forcing it closed from the outside. Dark shapes were descending through the shaft. Gray-robed figures with their featureless masks, moving with mechanical precision. They cannot reach the core, the curator said, and for the first time there was urgency in its voice. But they can collapse the structure. They have placed charges on the outer hull. You have approximately 3 minutes before this entire asteroid fragments. How do we get out? Sarah demanded. The same way you entered, quickly. They ran. The walkway beneath them began to shake as the first charges detonated. Holographic ghosts scattered in panic, ancient voices crying out in dead languages. A silenced figure dropped in front of them, weapon raised. Cassian didn't break stride. He tackled the figure, using his height and mass to drive it over the edge of the walkway. They both fell toward the pool of liquid memory below. Cassian, Sarah screamed, but he had already caught himself on a support strut, pulling himself back up with inhuman strength. Keep moving, he shouted. They reached the shaft just as a massive explosion rocked the entire structure. The carefully maintained gravity failed. They were suddenly weightless, tumbling through the darkness. Sarah grabbed Cassian's hand. She focused on the mark, on the connection to the monument, to the network that spanned galaxies. Show me the way out. The mark flared. A path appeared in her mind, not visible but known. She kicked off the wall at a precise angle, pulling Cassian with her. They shot through the shaft like a bullet, emerging onto the asteroid's surface, just as the entire northern hemisphere began to collapse inward. Their magnetic boots engaged. They ran across the fragmenting surface, leaping across widening cracks. Pip had brought the ship in close. The boarding ramp extended, engines screaming. Jump, he was screaming over the comms. Jump now. They jumped. Sarah's fingers caught the edge of the ramp. Cassian slammed into the hull next to her, his own grip barely holding. The ship's engines fired, tearing them away from the disintegrating asteroid. Behind them, the archive collapsed completely. The hollow sphere crushed inward, compressing 400,000 years of preserved memory into a singularity of light and data that flared once, brilliantly, before winking out of existence. Pip dragged them inside and sealed the ramp. They lay on the deck, gasping, their suits' alarms screaming about a dozen different critical failures. Did you, Pip started, did you get what you needed? Sarah held up her arm. The mark was glowing steadily now, pulsing with contained information. We got it, all of it. Good, great, wonderful. Pip's voice was shaking because I just received a transmission from Meridian. Director Kane has declared a state of emergency, martial law across the entire system. And she's offering a bounty of 1 million credits for your capture. He pulled up the transmission on the main screen. Director Kane's face filled the display, her orange eyes blazing. Sarah Chen has been exposed to a catastrophic pathogen. She is a threat to every living being in this system. All ships are ordered to assist in her capture. Failure to comply will be treated as an act of war against the Concord. The transmission cut to footage of the ceremony, but it had been edited. Cut to make it look like Sarah had attacked the monument violently, like she had been carrying some kind of weapon. She's rewriting history, Cassian said quietly, making you the villain. Sarah stood, pulling off her helmet. Her hair was plastered to her skull with sweat. Her arm was a constellation of glowing marks. Her eyes were ringed with exhaustion, but her voice was steady. Then let's give her the truth she's so afraid of. Pip, can you broadcast from here? Broadcast what? Everything, all the data from the archive, every financial record, every fabricated report, every order she gave to silence whistleblowers. We flood the network. We make it impossible to ignore. That will, Pip's ears flatten, that will destabilize the entire Concord. Governments will fall. There will be chaos. There's already chaos, Sarah said. It's just been hidden behind propaganda and threats. I'm done being invisible. I'm done playing by rules designed to keep people like me in our place. She looked at Cassian. You said you failed your protege because you were afraid. Here's your chance to choose differently. Cashin was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. Pip, prepare the broadcast. Pip looked between them, the tall Vayan, who had spent 40 years upholding the system, and the human woman who had accidentally brought it crashing down. You're both insane, he said, but his fingers were already flying across the console, setting up the transmission protocols. I need to splice into the main communication relays. That's going to take time, and Kane will detect it the moment we start. We'll have maybe 60 seconds before every ship in the system converges on our position. How long to set it up? Sarah asked. 10 minutes, maybe less. Then let's get started. They worked in desperate silence, Pip routing data streams, Cashin managing the ship's defensive systems, Sarah organizing the evidence into a format that would be undeniable, unavoidable, impossible to dismiss. 5 minutes in, the first patrol ships appeared on sensors. 7 minutes in, Pip's console lit up with proximity warnings. We've got company, he said. Multiple vectors. They're trying to box us in. How long? Sarah asked, not looking up from her work. 3 minutes until broadcast is ready. 2 minutes until they're in weapons range. That's going to be close. 8 minutes. The ship shuddered as a warning shot passed close enough to make the shields flare. They're not trying to destroy us, Cassian observed. They're trying to disable the engines. That's almost worse. 9 minutes. Sarah's fingers flew across the controls, making final adjustments. The evidence was damning. 40 years of corruption laid bare in financial records, communication logs, in Kane's own words, ordering assassinations and cover-ups. But she added something else, something the archive had shown her. The truth about humanity, the ancient records, the star charts showing human civilization spanning the galaxy 10,000 years before the Concord existed, the seed-bearer protocols, the reason her species had left. Ready? She said. Broadcast in 3, Pip called out. 2, 1. The ship's entire comm system lit up like a supernova. The data packet burst outward in all directions, bouncing off relay stations, flooding every receiver in range. It was too large to stop, too distributed to block. Within seconds, it had reached Meridian. Within minutes, it was spreading across the system. Within hours, it would reach every world in the Concord. On her throne in the viewing sanctum, Director Helena Kane watched her entire career, her entire life's work, unravel in real time. Screens filled with evidence she had spent 40 years burying. Her voice, cold and commanding, ordering deaths. Her signature on documents that stripped worlds of their resources. Her secret meetings with warlords and oligarchs. And worst of all, the truth about the monument, about what it really was, about who the humans really were. The lie that had held the Concord together, that had held her in power, was burning away like fog in sunlight. She looked down at her wrist, at the counterfeit mark she had carved into her own flesh. She had been so certain she could control it. Control the narrative. Control the truth. But truth, she was discovering, was not something that could be controlled. It could only be acknowledged or denied. Kane made her choice. She activated the emergency protocols. Martial law became martial assault. Every ship in the fleet received new orders. Destroy Sarah Chen. No survivors, no witnesses. The hunt was no longer about capture. It was about erasure. In the cockpit of the Nomad's Regret, alarms were screaming. They're not warning us anymore, Pip said, his voice high with panic. They're firing to kill. Multiple ships, multiple angles. We can't... I know where to go, Sarah interrupted. The mark on her arm was burning again. But this time it wasn't pain. It was direction. The monument. We have to get back to Meridian. Back to the monument. That's suicide, Pip yelped. That's literally flying into the teeth of... The monument is the only thing that can prove what I'm saying. It's the only thing Kane can't manipulate or destroy. If I can reach it, if I can complete the activation, then what? Keshin asked quietly. Sarah looked at him. Then we find out what happens when you stop asking a god for permission and start demanding answers. Pip made a sound that was half sob, half hysterical laugh. We're going to die. We're absolutely going to die. Probably, Sarah agreed, but we're going to die doing something that matters. She looked at the mark on her arm, at the data still flowing through her consciousness, at the truth she had promised to speak. Set course for Meridian, full burn, no stealth, no evasion. Let them see us coming. Cassian moved to the weapons console without being asked. Pip pulled up the navigation. "This is the stupidest thing I've ever done," he muttered. "And I once tried to sell a fake religious relic to a genuine prophet." The Nomad's regret turned and began its final approach to the planet where everything had started, where Sarah Chen had accidentally touched something that hadn't wanted to be touched, and where, if she survived the next few hours, she would finish what she had accidentally begun. The monument was waiting. It had been waiting for 400 years. It could wait a little longer. The return to Meridian was less a flight plan and more a controlled plummet into hell. The Nomad's regret screamed through the upper atmosphere, trailing fire and fury, every alarm system simultaneously informing them that they were about to die. The orbital defense grid had locked onto their signature the moment they entered the system. Interceptors swarmed like angry wasps. Energy weapons carved the sky into geometric patterns of destruction. Pip's hands were a blur across the controls, coaxing performance from the ship that the manufacturers had definitely not intended. "I'm running out of miracles here. Shields at 30%, 28, 25 mastitun." Sarah sat in the co-pilot seat, her marked arm extended toward the viewport. The violet light pulsed in rhythm with something vast and patient far below. She could feel the monument calling to her, or maybe she was calling to it. The distinction no longer seemed important. "There's a gap," she said, her voice distant. "In the defense grid. Sector 7, subsection Theta. They haven't closed it yet." "That's because it's a trap," Cassian said from the weapons station. He was methodically targeting the most aggressive pursuers, his shots precise and economical. "They're funneling us toward the plaza. They want us to land exactly where Kane is waiting." "Good," Sarah said. "So do I." The ship banked hard, following the path Sarah could see sketched in fire across her vision. They dove through the gap in the grid, through a tunnel of synchronized weapons fire that should have obliterated them, but somehow, impossibly, didn't. They broke through the cloud layer. New Geneva spread below them like a jewel shattered across black velvet. But the jewel was burning. Riots had broken out across multiple districts. The broadcast had done its work. People who had spent their lives trusting the Concorde were discovering what their trust had purchased. And at the center of the case, untouched and absolute, stood the monument. "Brace for impact," Pip screamed. The Nomad's regret hit the plaza at an angle that turned landing into barely controlled catastrophe. They skidded across the white stone in a shower of sparks and torn metal, carving a trench through the ceremonial gardens before finally slamming to a halt less than 50 meters from the monument's base. For a moment, there was only ringing silence and the smell of burning electronics. Then the hatch blew open. Sarah stumbled out, her legs barely holding her. The plaza was surrounded by guards, hundreds of them, arranged in concentric circles with weapons trained on the crashed ship. Holographic displays floated in the air, broadcasting her face alongside labels like terrorist and biological threat, an enemy of peace. Director Kane stood on the ceremonial platform, exactly where Sarah had stood during the humiliation ceremony that felt like a lifetime ago. She wore robes of pure white that seemed to glow with their own internal light. Her orange eyes blazed with something that might have been rage or might have been fear. "Sarah Chen," Kane's voice boomed across the plaza, amplified by systems that had somehow survived the chaos. "You are charged with terrorism, theft of classified material, and crimes against the Concord. Surrender immediately and you will be granted a trial. Resist, and you will be terminated where you stand." Sarah took a step forward. Her marked arm hung at her side, pulsing with violet light that was visible even in the twin sun's glare. "I have a better idea. Why don't you explain to everyone here what you were really planning? Why don't you tell them about the counterfeit mark, about the staged crisis, about the 40 years you spent burying evidence of your crimes?" "Lies," Kane said smoothly. "Delusions induced by the pathogen you carry. You are not well, Sarah Chen. You need help. Is that what you told yourself when you ordered Ambassador Krell's execution? When you authorized the massacre on Theta Station? When you embezzled relief funds meant for the Rimworlds?" Sarah's voice was getting stronger, carrying across the plaza. "I have the records, Director. I have your voice on the logs. I have your signature on the kill orders, and I just broadcast all of it to every system in the Concord." A murmur rippled through the crowd, civilians and guards alike. Some of them had already seen the broadcast. Others were pulling out personal devices, accessing the data even as they stood in the plaza. Kane's composure cracked slightly. "Whatever fabricated evidence you claim to possess is irrelevant. The monument itself will validate my authority. It will prove that I speak with divine mandate." She pulled back her sleeve, revealing her scarred wrist with its embedded circuitry. "I am the chosen. I bear the mark of the monument." She turned and slammed her hand against the black stone. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the monument responded, but not the way Kane expected. The rejection was immediate and absolute. A pulse of pure white energy exploded from the point of contact, throwing Kane backward across the platform. The circuitry in her wrist didn't just malfunction, it ignited. Flames erupted from beneath her skin as the counterfeit mark consumed itself. Kane screamed, not in pain, though the pain must have been extraordinary. She screamed in humiliation and the shattering realization that her entire gambit had failed. The crowd gasped, some stepping back. Others raised their weapons uncertainly. Cassian emerged from the ship, moving to stand beside Sarah. He was battered, his armor scorched, but his presence was still commanding. The monument cannot be controlled. Director Kane attempted to force a bond that was never meant to exist. The monument rejected her, as it has rejected every attempt at manipulation for 400 years. He looked at Sarah, but it did not reject Sarah Chen. It chose her. The question is, why? Sarah took another step toward the monument. Guards raised their weapons, but nobody fired. The moment was too strange, too unprecedented. "Because I asked," Sarah said simply. "Not with words, but when I touched it, I wasn't trying to control it. I wasn't trying to force it to validate anything. I was just curious. I wanted to understand." She was close enough now to feel the monument's presence like a physical weight. The mark on her arm burned, but it was a good burn, like muscles being used after too long dormant. The monument isn't a god. It's not a weapon or a throne or a symbol. It's a library, a repository of truth. And it's been waiting. For 400 years, it's been waiting for someone to finally ask the right question. "What question?" someone in the crowd called out. Sarah looked up at the towering expanse of lightless stone. "What happened to us? What happened to humanity? Why did we forget who we were?" She placed her palm against the monument. This time she was ready for the contact. The connection slammed into her like a tidal wave, but she rode it instead of being swept away. The mark on her arm flared so bright it turned the shadows white, and the monument spoke. Not just to Sarah, to everyone. Every mind in the plaza, every consciousness within range of the monument's psychic reach, suddenly understood. They didn't hear words. They experienced knowing. 10,000 years ago, humanity had been the seed bearers. They had built the network of monuments across the galaxy, creating pathways between stars and establishing archives to preserve the knowledge of every species they encountered. They had been explorers, builders, peacekeepers. And then they had discovered something in the deep dark between galaxies. Something old and patient and utterly wrong. An intelligence that consumes civilizations not by destroying them, but by making them forget. Erasing history, severing connections, turning thriving networks into isolated fragments. The seed bearers had fought it. They had won, barely, but the cost had been everything. To seal the entity away, to ensure it could never return, they had been forced to sever their own connection to the network. To forget, to scatter themselves across primitive worlds and start over with nothing but genetic potential and the faintest whisper of what they had once been. The monuments had been left behind as archives, as warning systems, as locked doors that would only open when humanity was ready, when they had rediscovered spaceflight, when they had matured enough to handle the truth, when someone finally touched the monument with genuine curiosity instead of the desire for control. Sarah Chen had been that someone. The vision faded, leaving the plaza in stunned silence. Sarah pulled her hand back from the monument, gasping. Tears streamed down her face, not from pain, but from the crushing weight of understanding. "We didn't leave. We sacrificed ourselves to save everyone else, and then we forgot we'd done it. Director Kane was on her knees, clutching her ruined wrist. She looked up at Sarah with eyes that held nothing but hollow defeat. It doesn't matter. Even if what you say is true, it changes nothing. The Concord is built on order, on stability, on the lie that we are all equal partners. But we're not. Some species are stronger, some are smarter, some deserve to lead. Your truth will only bring chaos. You're right, Sarah said quietly. It will bring chaos. The comfortable lies that hold your power structure together are burning as we speak. Governments will fall, new ones will rise. There will be violence and confusion and suffering. She looked around at the crowd, at the humans and the Vayans, and the dozens of other species represented in the plaza. But there will also be truth, and from truth eventually comes justice. Real justice, not the kind that depends on keeping people ignorant and afraid. She turned back to the monument. The mark on her arm was changing again. The violet light was spreading, not painfully now, but purposefully. It was writing something across her skin in script that shifted between human letters and alien glyphs in mathematical equations. Sarah could feel the power building. The monument was offering her something, access to the full network. The ability to activate every monument across the galaxy simultaneously. She could force the truth onto every world, into every mind, all at once. She could control the narrative on a scale that made Kane's manipulations look like child's play. All she had to do was accept. The temptation was enormous. With that power, she could fix everything. She could force peace. She could make people listen, make them understand, make them stop fighting and start building something better. She could matter. She could be the most important person in galactic history. She could stop being invisible. Sarah's hand trembled over the monument. Sarah, Cassian's voice, quiet and close. He had moved to stand beside her without her noticing. What are you seeing? Control, she whispered. It's offering me control. I could activate the entire network. Force every monument to broadcast what we learned. Make everyone understand. Force, Cassian repeated. That word should concern you. Sarah looked at him. His black eyes held something she hadn't seen before. Not authority, not certainty, just tired wisdom and genuine concern. If you force understanding, you become exactly what Kane tried to be. A benevolent tyrant who knows what's best for everyone else. The method changes, but the arrogance remains the same. But people are dying. Right now, across the city, they're dying because they don't understand. Then help them understand. Teach them. Show them. But don't force them. He placed a hand on her shoulder that touched gentle despite his size. You said the monument responded to you because you asked instead of demanded. Don't lose that now. Don't let power turn curiosity into certainty. Sarah closed her eyes. The temptation was still there, burning like the mark on her arm. It would be so easy, so satisfying, to finally have the power to make things right. But Cassian was right. The moment she started believing she knew what was best for everyone else, the moment she decided that forced enlightenment was acceptable, she would become the very thing she was fighting against. She lowered her hand. The mark flared once, bright and hot, then settled into a steady glow. The monument's presence in her mind shifted, not disappointment. The monument didn't traffic in human emotions, but acknowledgement. She had passed the test. She had chosen restraint over power. Then what do I do? Sarah asked, opening her eyes. How do I fix this without control? You don't fix it, Cassian said. You start it. You give people the truth and trust them to decide what to do with it. And if they make the wrong choice, then they make it. Free will includes the freedom to fail. Sarah took a breath. She turned to face the crowd, acutely aware that she was exhausted, filthy, marked with alien technology, and standing in the smoking wreckage of her own crashed ship. She was also the only person in the plaza who had direct access to the monument. I'm not your leader, she said. Her voice was raw but clear. I'm not your savior. I'm a technician who accidentally touched something I didn't understand. And what I learned, what we all just learned, is that the universe is bigger and stranger and more complicated than any of us imagined. She gestured to the monument. This isn't a throne. It's not a weapon. It's a question that's been waiting 400 years for someone to finally ask. And now that the question has been asked, we all have to decide how to answer. She pulled up her sleeve, showing the mark in all its alien glory. The network exists. The monuments exist. The truth about humanity exists. What we do with that knowledge is up to all of us. Not me, not Director Kane, not any single person who thinks they know what's best. She looked directly at the camera drones still broadcasting across the system. I'm going to open the monument. I'm going to activate the protocols that will allow anyone, any species, any world to access the archives. The truth will be available to everyone. And then I'm going to step back and let you decide what kind of future you want to build. A voice from the crowd. What if we make things worse? Sarah smiled tiredly. Then we'll be making our own mistakes instead of living with someone else's lies. That's called freedom. It's messy and terrifying and absolutely necessary. She turned back to the monument one final time. But before she could touch it, alarms screamed across the plaza. Reactor overload, someone shouted. The monument's power systems are destabilizing. The activation, Director Kane's forced connection, it damaged the core regulators. Pip's voice crackled over Sarah's comm. Sarah, I'm reading massive energy buildup. If that detonates, it'll take out the entire city. Of course, there was one more crisis. Sarah looked at the monument, at the mark on her arm, at the equations scrolling across her vision that explained exactly what was happening. Kane's counterfeit mark had forced a connection that the monument wasn't designed to handle. It had created feedback loops in the power matrix. The energy that should have been distributed across the entire network was backing up, concentrating, building toward catastrophic release. How long? Sarah asked. 4 minutes, maybe 5 if we're lucky. Sarah's mind raced. She could see the solution the monument was showing her. She needed to activate the full network, to vent the excess energy into the dormant monuments across the galaxy. It would stabilize the system and prevent the explosion, but it would require a complete connection. Not just touching the monument, but bonding with it, becoming a living conduit for power that was never meant to flow through human neural pathways. It would burn her out, completely, permanently. She would survive, probably. But the part of her that made her Sarah Chen, her memories, her personality, herself, would be erased, overwritten by the sheer volume of data flowing through her consciousness. She would save everyone and lose everything. Sarah looked at her hands. They were shaking. There has to be another way, Cassian said. He had seen her expression, understood what she was thinking. Sarah, you don't have to. I can vent the reactor, Sarah said quietly. I can open the network, distribute the energy, save the city, but I need to become the conduit. And that much power flowing through me. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Cassian's face went very still. How much of you would be left? I don't know, maybe nothing, maybe fragments. The monument can't predict how human neurology will respond to that kind of load. Then we find another solution. We evacuate. We don't have time, Sarah interrupted. And even if we did, this city has millions of people, millions of lives that matter just as much as mine. She smiled, and it was the saddest smile Cassian had ever seen. I'm tired of being invisible, remember? This way I'll be remembered. The woman who saved New Geneva. That's not nothing. Sarah, she placed her hand on the monument. The connection slammed into her like a star going supernova. And then Cassian's hand closed over hers. Sarah's eyes flew open. What are you doing? Sharing the load, Cassian said calmly. His own hand was pressed against the monument beside hers, his long fingers interlaced with her smaller ones. You said you needed a conduit. You didn't say it had to be a single conduit. You don't have a mark. You can't. I have 40 years of experience with Concord technology. I have neural modifications from my time as an envoy. I have a stubborn refusal to watch another brilliant young woman die because I was too afraid to act. His black eyes met hers, and I have a debt to pay. This is insane. The strain could kill you. Then we die together, or we survive together, but we don't do this alone. The monument seemed to consider. Sarah could feel it analyzing their combined biosignatures, calculating probabilities, weighing outcomes. Then it accepted. The mark on Sarah's wrist split, a tendril of violet light extending to wrap around Cassian's wrist. He gasped, his entire body going rigid as the connection established. And then the power came. It was like trying to drink an ocean through a straw. It was like holding a sun in cupped palms. It was every sensation amplified beyond meaning. Pain and pleasure and pressure and release all happening simultaneously. Sarah screamed. Cassian didn't scream. He couldn't. His vocal cords locked by the current flowing through him, but his hand tightened on hers with crushing force. Together, they became the bridge. Energy poured through them, through the connection forged between the monument and the network it had been severed from for 4 centuries. Across the galaxy, dormant monuments began to wake. Lights that had been dark for millennia flickered to life. Sarah could see it all. She could feel the network spreading like neurons firing in a vast cosmic brain. She could sense the other monuments accepting the connection, drawing power, stabilizing. The reactor core beneath New Geneva stabilized. The deadly buildup vented harmlessly into the network, distributed across 100 worlds. The city was saved. But the price was being paid in real time. Sarah's consciousness was fragmenting. She could feel pieces of herself being overwritten by the sheer volume of information flowing through her mind. Memories dissolved, personality traits scattered like leaves in a storm. She was losing herself, but Cassian was there. His presence in the data stream was like an anchor, like a hand reaching through the chaos to hold her together. His experience with neural interfaces, his decades of disciplined mental control, allowed him to shoulder more of the burden than she could have alone. He was burning himself out to save her. "Let go," Sarah tried to say, but she wasn't sure if the words came out. "You're dying." "So are you," his voice echoed in the space between their minds. "But we're not done yet." "Hold on, Sarah, stay with me. We're almost through." The power surge peaked. For one eternal moment, Sarah Chen and Cassian Velar ceased to be separate entities. They were a singular point of consciousness, suspended between the monument and the stars, between the past and the future, between what was and what could be. In that moment, they understood everything, and then the connection severed. They were thrown backward, landing hard on the white stone of the plaza. The monument pulsed once, a deep, resonant tone that wasn't sound but was felt in the bones, and then went still. The mark on Sarah's arm faded to a silver scar. The mark on Cassian's wrist did the same. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Sarah gasped, drawing air into lungs that felt like they'd forgotten how to breathe. "Did we?" she started. "We survived," Cassian said hoarsely. He was staring at his own hand like he'd never seen it before. "Somehow, impossibly, we survived." Pip's voice crackled over the comm, thick with tears. "The reactor's stable. The energy readings are normalizing. You did it! You actually did it!" The crowd erupted in confused cheering. Sarah tried to stand and discovered her legs had other ideas. She collapsed back onto the stone, her entire body shaking with exhaustion. Cassian wasn't in much better shape. He crawled over to sit beside her, both of them leaning against each other for support. "I can't remember," Sarah said quietly. "Parts of it. The connection. It's like trying to remember a dream. I know it happened, but the details are gone," Cassian finished. "Or perhaps just redistributed. I suspect we left pieces of ourselves in the network. The price of bonding was something that vast." Are you still you?" Cassian considered. "I remember my name. I remember my failures. I remember choosing to help you instead of running away." He looked at her. "I remember that you are stubborn and brilliant and you refuse to kneel. So yes, I am still myself. Or close enough." Sarah laughed weakly. "I remember that you are infuriatingly calm and you have terrible timing for apologies." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Close enough works for me." They sat in silence, watching as guards lowered their weapons, as the crowd slowly processed what had just happened, as the city around them began the long, painful process of rebuilding. Director Kane was being led away in restraints, her burned wrist wrapped in medical bandages. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the loss of her power and her certainty. She met Sarah's eyes as she passed. "You've destroyed everything," she said quietly. "The order, the stability, the peace." "No," Sarah said. "I've destroyed the lies that were holding those things together. What comes next is up to everyone else." Kane was silent for a moment. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. It was a bitter smile, but genuine. "You're more naive than I thought. But perhaps naivety is what the galaxy needs right now. Cynicism certainly hasn't served us well. Then she was gone, escorted away to face trial under the new transparency protocols. 3 weeks later, the Great Hall of the Concord was packed with representatives from 1,000 worlds. But the hall itself looked different. The golden banners were gone. The throne at the center had been removed. In their place were simple screens displaying real-time data from the Monument Network. Transparent, available to all, impossible to manipulate. Sarah stood at a podium wearing a simple gray suit that actually fit properly this time. Her arm was still marked with silver scars from the bonding, but they no longer glowed. They were just marks now, reminders. She had refused every title they tried to give her: High Custodian, Network Administrator, First Inheritor. She had turned them all down. "I'm not your leader," she said into the microphone, and her words were broadcast to every world in the network. "I'm an engineer. I fix things. I read old books. I ask questions." She gestured to the screens behind her. "The Monument Network is open. The archives are accessible. The truth about our shared history, all of it, including the parts that are uncomfortable, is available to anyone who wants to learn." She paused, looking out at the assembly. "But the network won't make decisions for you. It won't tell you what to do or who to trust. It will only tell you what is. What you build from that knowledge is entirely up to you." She pulled out a prepared statement and very deliberately tore it in half. "I was supposed to read a speech about unity and cooperation and building a better future together. But I'm tired of speeches. So here's what I'm going to do instead. I'm resigning from any and all official positions. I'm stepping back. I'm going back to being a technician who fixes things." The hall erupted in murmurs. "But," a counselor started, "the only way to trust power," Sarah interrupted, "is to watch someone give it up. I opened the network. I gave you access to truth. What you do with it is not my decision to make. It's yours, all of yours." She stepped down from the podium. Cassian was waiting for her in the wings. He was no longer wearing envoy robes, just a simple tunic and practical pants. He looked more relaxed than Sarah had ever seen him. "That was short," he observed. "I promised myself I'd keep it brief. How do you feel? Terrified, relieved, hungry? Is there food at this thing?" "There is a reception, with terrible canapes and worse conversation." "Sounds perfect." They walked together through the corridors of the hall, an unlikely pair that had somehow saved the galaxy and survived the experience. "So," Sarah said as they walked, "what do you do after you've bonded with an ancient alien monument and dismantled a corrupt government?" "I've been considering that question," Kishin said. "There is a new oversight coalition being formed. Independent auditors, civilian committees, no politicians. They need someone to chair it. Are you applying?" "I was thinking of nominating you." Sarah stopped walking. "Absolutely not. I just resigned from everything. I'm going back to fixing coffee machines and reading dusty books." "I suspected you would say that." Cassian pulled a datapad from his pocket and handed it to her. "Which is why I took the liberty of drafting a proposal for a different position. Independent researcher, access to the monument archives, autonomy to investigate whatever catches your interest. Terrible pay, long hours, constant arguments with people who think they know better." Sarah took the datapad, reading the proposal. A smile tugged at her lips. "And who would I be working with?" "I have been told I need a research partner, someone who understands the network, someone who asks good questions." He paused. "Someone who is not afraid to tell me when I am being insufferably certain about something." "That's a long job description. It is a complicated position." Sarah looked up at him. His black eyes held something that might have been hope or might have been simple companionship. After everything they had been through, the distinction didn't seem important. "Will there be tea?" she asked. "Only if you fix the machine." "Deal." That evening, Sarah stood on a balcony overlooking the Monument Plaza. The sun was setting, painting the white stone in shades of amber and rose. The plaza below had been converted into a public park. Families walked there now. Children played in the shadow of the monument, laughing without fear. Cassian joined her, carrying 2 cups of tea. He handed one to Sarah. "You fixed the machine," he observed. "I'm good at fixing things." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights begin to flicker on across New Geneva. It's strange, Sarah said quietly. It's so quiet now. The noise was the lies, Cassian said. Truth is quiet, but it echoes further. Sarah sipped her tea. It was terrible. She had definitely not fixed the machine correctly, but she didn't mention it. Do you think it will work? She asked. The transparency protocols, the open network, giving people access to truth and trusting them to use it well. I think it will be messy and complicated and there will be mistakes, but mistakes made in honesty are better than success built on lies. That's almost optimistic. Are you feeling well? I am feeling like perhaps the future is not predetermined, like perhaps we have a choice in what comes next. It is an unfamiliar sensation, but not entirely unpleasant. Sarah looked at him, at this tall, strange, beautiful person who had chosen to share her burden when he could have let her burn alone. Thank you for not letting me do it alone. Thank you for giving me the chance to choose differently, for letting me be more than my failures. Sarah reached out and took his hand, not the marked one. That had complicated symbology now, just his hand, warm and steady and real. If I'm the disaster, she said, echoing words from a lifetime ago, what does that make you? Cassian looked at their joined hands, at the city spreading below them, at the monument standing witness to everything they had survived. The one who stays, he said simply. Sarah leaned against him, her head on his shoulder, and they watched the stars come out over a city that was learning to tell itself the truth. Far above them, beyond the atmosphere, beyond the system, scattered across the galaxy, dormant monuments flickered to life one by one. Lights that had been dark for 400 years began to glow with soft violet luminescence. The network was waking, and somewhere in the deep dark between galaxies, something ancient, impatient felt the change, felt the connections reforming, felt the pathways opening that had been closed for so long. It was still sealed, still locked away, still separated from the civilizations it had once consumed, but it could feel them again, and it could wait. After all, it had been waiting for a very long time. What were a few more centuries? The monument in New Geneva pulsed once, a gentle reminder that vigilance was eternal, that truth required constant defense, that the price of knowledge was the responsibility to protect it. Sarah felt the pulse in her scarred wrist. She understood. It's not over, she said quietly. No, Cassian agreed, but it's not beginning either. We're simply in the middle of a very long story. What chapter do you think we're in? Cassian was quiet for a moment, considering. The one where the heroes stop being certain they're right, where they learn to ask questions instead of giving answers, where they realize that saving the galaxy is less important than teaching the galaxy to save itself. That's a terrible chapter title. You can workshop it, Sarah laughed. It was a real laugh, warm and genuine and utterly exhausted. Below them, the monument hummed, not with power or threat or warning, just with presence. A reminder that it was there, that it would always be there, that truth, however uncomfortable, was worth preserving. And in the plaza, children continued playing. Families continued walking. People continued choosing what kind of world they wanted to build. Sarah Chen, who had been invisible her entire life, who had accidentally touched something that changed everything, who had chosen the restraint over power and partnership over control, smiled. Let's go, she said. We have work to do tomorrow. What kind of work? I don't know yet, but I'm sure we'll figure it out. They turned away from the balcony, away from the monument, and walked toward whatever came next. Together. The monument stood behind them, silent, impatient, exactly as it had stood for 400 years. But it was not waiting anymore. It was watching. And across the galaxy, on 100 worlds, people were waking up to a truth they had forgotten. That humanity had once built bridges between stars. That they had sacrificed everything to save civilizations they barely knew. That they had been forgotten and dismissed and underestimated. And that despite all of it, despite the millennia of silence and obscurity, and starting over with nothing, they had returned. Not with conquest, not with demands, but with a question. And sometimes the most powerful force in the universe is someone brave enough to ask.